Could you sing us a song, Paul, while we're waiting?
I'm not in the right position to sing, actually. I was saying to the guys earlier, I do apologise that where I'm sitting in terms of the light, it is bouncing off the top of my head and is likely to blind everybody. So I do apologise for that in advance. I need to get some more flattering lighting when we do this kind of thing. Is Dan with us? Sorry, is Rob with us? Rob's in. Great. Okay. I think, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, it's gone 10:05, so shall we commence? Great. Well, welcome everybody. Good morning in these strange and interesting times, shall we say. I will refrain from using the word unprecedented, considering it's almost become a cliche now. And every day, those of us who are in business are facing new announcements, new challenges. The ground is moving as quickly as almost we can cope with. But I think one of the things that has typified the past few weeks, outside of some of the major business challenges that we've all faced, has been the increased sense of innovation that people have gone through, an increased sense of looking at their business and going, how do we operate now in what will be the new norm? And there is the first cliche. What will be the new norm going forward? AFC Bournemouth, the business club, is at the forefront of that, hence doing what we're doing today. And I'll introduce Professor Tim Rees later on, who's going to give us a really interesting and thought-provoking presentation about peak performance and how that really relates to our business. But before we go any further, Rob?
Yes, I'm here. I'm back.
There you are. Hello, Rob. I just want to introduce Rob Mitchell to you, who is going to just talk to us a little bit about where AFC or Bournemouth are, the plans, etc., and the situation. So, Rob, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good morning to you all, and a very warm welcome to our first AFC Business webinar. Importantly, I hope you're all safe and well and successfully finding your way through these very challenging times. And the football club, we remain busy. Obviously, our business is very different at the moment, as everyone's is, without football. But we remain very focused on our local community. Although we can't go out as we did before, visiting the 4,000 people a week through our community programme, we've still been able to engage with the wider community, mostly virtually, obviously. So just to give you some examples of some of that work that we've been doing. So our staff and footballers have been making hundreds of calls a week to engage in conversations with our vulnerable supporters and supporters that are living in isolation. As I say, where our community coaches can't go out into the community, we've been delivering and sharing virtual health, fitness and wellbeing sessions online, targeted at children, parents, teachers, schools and community groups. Our players and the club have donated money to local hospices and local charities as well. And we've been donating food items, thousands of food items to local food banks as well. So in terms of the remainder of the football season, it's still very much up in the air. The government obviously announced this week that sports, if it's going to be played at all, the earliest will be from the 1st of June and it'll be behind closed doors. So we're awaiting further government guidance on that at the moment. And obviously we need the season to be completed to determine the start date for next season and very importantly our league status as well. So with my commercial team and all the staff that I work with at the club, I've been trying to encourage them to remain positive and to see the positives from each day, whether that's spending more time at home with the family. Obviously the weather's been relatively kind to us, so whether it's the opportunity to work outside in the garden at the moment, us not having to operate at 100 miles an hour, going from meeting to meeting, to be places at certain times at the moment, giving us time to reflect and to be more creative and to be more strategic as well, and to forward plan. And the positive that I'm seeing from this time as well is just how incredibly generous people are and the togetherness that we're seeing across our community as well. And hopefully that will continue beyond COVID as well. Hopefully that this is something that will become ingrained in us now, and this will be society moving forward, we hope. I wanted to say a big thank you to our guest speaker, Professor Tim Rees, for joining us this morning. Bournemouth University are a key partner for AFC Bournemouth and have been for around about 8 years now. We're very proud to work in partnership with Bournemouth Uni. And also to thank Paul Kinvig as well for hosting this morning's event. And look out for more of these webinars to come. Obviously, the whole events programme for everyone is very different at the moment. So, we're looking to host more of these events online. And we'd really like some input from you as to let us know what key topics, key themes maybe we could address. Whether you have any links with potential speakers that could be involved and we could theme and host an event in partnership. If you do, then please contact one of the commercial team at the football club, and we'll be happy to have a discussion with you about that. So yeah, just to say, I'm going to hand over to Paul now, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Just to reflect that, I think this issue of an increased sense of community and an increased sense of working together, and kind of the old rules almost being torn up. And I think what, if anything, what's been really interesting about the past few weeks, as Rob has rightly said, has been this sense of community and this sense of coming together and working together in many, many different ways. You can see in front of you the commercial team. Amy, give us a wave. Fraser, give us a wave. Aisha, whose birthday it is today. So a big happy birthday to Aisha from everybody here on the call. Rob, you've seen obviously as well, and Dan, who you can't see, who made the excuse earlier that his corporate background wouldn't work. The reality is he's got a massive spot on the end of his nose, and so he won't actually just switch his video on. So you can't see a wave from Dan, but Dan's there as well. To reflect, oh, there he is, just to prove he hasn't got a spot on his nose. Hi, Dan. Just to reflect Rob's sense, get in touch with the guys at the commercial team. If you've got any ideas or thoughts on the kinds of ways in which AFC Bournemouth and the Business Club can actually develop it through. Just a couple of housekeeping things before I hand over to Tim. As Rob said, my name's Paul Kinvig. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Bournemouth Town Centre Bid. But we work really closely with, and I work really closely with Rob and the team at AFC Bournemouth because they're a hugely important part of the Bournemouth economy. And as you can imagine, for us, it's a rather interesting time in the same way it is for everybody that's currently running any kind of business within the conurbation. Just a couple of housekeeping rules before we go any further. You will have seen in the email to you about today that today's event is being recorded. So if you are happy with that, then please leave your video on. If you are not and don't particularly want your face being on that and so forth, then down to the left on the Zoom meeting, if you're not an experienced user of Zoom, you will see a video camera icon that says stop video. So if you want to click on that, it means that your image won't be actually seen in terms of the recording. We've asked everybody to mute. It helps with the connection speeds, but also rather than have people using the raise hand function on Zoom, as Professor Tim Rees is speaking, if you have any questions for a Q&A session that we'll have at the end, could you please use the chat function? If you're not sure what that is, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see an icon that says chat. If you just then type into that when it comes up, your question, and can you please put your name and the company that you work for or own or work with, or however it is, what your position is within that organization, and send that. What we'll do is we'll take a selection of those questions at the end of Tim's talk, and we'll allow Tim to expound or answer some of the questions that I'm sure you're going to have from what Tim is going to talk about. So without any further ado, let me introduce Professor Tim Rees from Bournemouth University. One of the key things that we've discovered, I think, about the past few weeks has been the importance, whilst technologies has enabled us to work in very, very different ways, it's still the importance of people, our relationships and people performance, etc. Tim is going to take us down a route and pose some questions and challenge us really on the nature of individuals and performance. And as Tim is talking, and to encourage you in terms of the questions you would ask, I'd really like you to think about, how does this reflect on my business? How does it reflect on my team? How does this operate for me if I am leading a team? And what culture or do I create, or challenges can I implement that will actually make my team and help my team and individuals in that achieve peak performance? So, ladies and gentlemen, I will hand over to Professor Tim Rees, Bournemouth University. Tim, take it away.
Hello, thanks a lot, Paul. Good morning to everybody. I'm just going to open up a screen share, and I would like to say hello to Sarah's dog that I can see there. So I hope she's going to enjoy, he or she is going to enjoy it as well. Let me just bring up our presentation. Okay, Paul, can you just confirm to me that that presentation's come up and you can hear me okay?
I can on both.
Okay, thanks very much. So let me just come back. I'm just sort of moving a few things around here so we can start. So really, I wanted to say that my talk is about, yeah, you've seen the title of my talk. My interest and the key aim that I'm hoping we'll get out of this talk is an understanding of what underpins exceptional performance. What is the origin of expertise? What makes, truly world-class athletes who they are? Now, through this process, I'm hoping that, that in and of itself is interesting to you. But as Paul suggested, I'm hoping you might also consider the findings and reflect on them in terms of you, your business, and all the different people you work with. Now, this is an important topic because the expertise domain is one which is fraught with myth, popular opinion, popular texts. And the issue with this is that it leads to misinformation, bad policy decisions by national governing bodies, coaches, leaders, teachers, and even parents. So it's an important talk. Now, primarily what I'm going to be talking about is work I've done for UK Sport. UK Sport is the nation's high-performance sport agency. They fund all of our athletes going to World Championships and Olympic Games. But not only has the work we've done informed all Olympic sports, but it's also now informed the England and Wales Cricket Board, England Rugby, the Lawn Tennis Association, and Team Sky. So from here, I'm going to give you a little bit of background of my own sort of interest before moving into the nature-nurture debate, and then carrying on to talk about findings from what we call the Great British Medalist Project. And then from that, we'll see if we can reflect on whether any of this has any crossover to business domains. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with this particular image. This is Bob Beamon, whose leap in the 1968 Olympic Games, so immense and so long that it's actually beat the silver medalist by 28 inches, an astounding record that lasted for a long time until around about 1990, I think it was, that the record was taken away. So what underpinned his performance, and what is it about him that made him who he is? Similarly, one could see this person, Diana Nyad. Now, when she was 67, this is back in 2013, she swam from Cuba to Florida, a distance of 110 miles through shark-infested waters, coming out at the end with jelly stings on her face. What is it about her that drove her on to achieve this particular milestone? Similarly, this is Dean Karnazes. What drove Dean Karnazes to run 50 marathons in 50 consecutive days in 50 states in the United States, and then celebrate by running home from New York City to his home in San Francisco? This is not sort of ordinary day-to-day behavior. What is it about them that makes them who they are? So it's these sorts of questions that pique our interest in elite performance, elite athletic performance, and we want to understand what is it about these people that makes them who they are. So that brings me to UK Sport. So back in 2010, I started doing research with UK Sport. And what surprised me was that the terminology they were using was not something I was used to. So they were describing how trying to get gold medals was a global arms race, and they described trying to win market share. Now, you wouldn't normally associate this with sport necessarily, but of course there's a backdrop to this. Now, I don't know if any of you know how many gold medals Team GB won at Rio 2016. Can you have a think for a second? So gold medals, I hope you can see this, with 27 gold medals in total. So there are around 66 medals, but 27 of them were gold. Now, if we were to go back 20 years to the Atlantic 1996 Games, this is a milestone because this was just before world-class funding came in, when athletes could be receiving national lottery and exchequer money in exchange for being able to train full-time. So at Atlanta 1996, do we know how many gold medals were won there? Any ideas? So just one gold medal. And who knows who that was? Your thinking caps on. Pinsent and Redgrave. So technically 2 medals, but in the medals table it counts as 1. So world-class funding came in and has made a huge difference for UK sport. But UK sport is under pressure now because there are vast sums of money spent. So the gold medal tally went up to 11 golds, as you'll see at Sydney 2000, and all the way up to London 2012 and Rio 2016. You'll see huge sums being spent. Now, in this supposed Olympic year, 2020, £264 million were being spent on the Olympic Games. In fact, including the Beijing Games, it would, which is the 2022 Winter Games, it was near 360 million. I believe UK Sport are seeking another 50 million to tidy them over to 2021 now, as the Games have been moved. So with this kind of spend, of course, UK Sport is under pressure to deliver medals, and it's led to this kind of ruthless culture. So from UK Sport's point of view, what they said to us when I first went to work with them is that they understand how to make an elite athlete. In other words, they understand how to get somebody to an Olympic Games or a World Championship. What they're less familiar with is this term, which is called super elite. Paul, can you confirm that people can see the right-hand side of the presentation, or they could?
Yes, I can see, Tim, a slide currently that says elite on the left and super elite on the right.
Perfect, because I've slightly blocked out with mine, so that's great. Yes, so the term super elite to them was to refer to somebody who might win a gold medal and win another gold medal, go to an Olympics, go to another Olympics, go to a World Championships, and keep striving to achieve high levels of performance. So there was a distinction between the elite, which is clearly very highly skilled, and this super elite, which is this another level, a real sort of world-class level of performer. Now, very quickly, it became apparent that this particular quote from Mencken was true, which is, for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. So this area of athletic expertise is replete with people who have strong opinions and often trying to simplify the performance pathway incorrectly. And I like to also refer to a couple of quotes here. One is by Mark Twain, which is, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And Stephen Hawking's famous one, which is, "The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge." So by this, I take it to mean that it's okay not to know something and to hold your hands up and say, I don't have the answer. The biggest problem is when people firmly believe they know something and then they impart this information to other people. So if you're a coach or a leader and you believe the way to reach the top is X, that is what you will portray to the charges who work under you. Similarly, for parents, they're doing their best to get information, to think about how can they support their children. And if they read simple messages, that might be what they pass on. So this can have quite, at the basic level, this can be just harmless ignorance, but at other times it can actually be harmful. So with that in mind, let's face it, it's plainly obvious that focusing on one sport and doing that really well is what's needed, right? I mean, I bet everyone would agree with that. Or in fact, that is incorrect according to the research. Similarly, clearly, the earlier we can get kids in with quality coaches, the better, right? This seems to make intuitive sense, but again, the evidence does not bear out this assumption. So as an example, Tom Daly, the diver, his coach was concerned back in around 2012 that Tom Daley wasn't working hard enough, and made the assumption, if you look at the Chinese divers, they work 3 times harder. That's the only secret, just work hard. Similarly, this is a retweet by Jason Robinson, who was a rugby union and rugby league star, tweeting a comment from Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And the quote was, "Be humble, be hungry, and always be the hardest worker in the room." Now, that's all well and good. If that's the way you think you need to progress, you will follow that information. But is that information correct and right for everybody? So the first bit of work we did for UK Sport is referred to as the Great British Medalist Project. And this was a review where we tried to understand what is known, what is likely to be true, and what we need to know next about the development of the world's best talent, which brings us to the nature-nurture debate. Now, the phrase nature versus nurture is generally credited to Sir Francis Galton, who wrote his text Hereditary Genius in 1869. And what he was trying to describe was how genius appeared to run in families. So there appeared to be this kind of nature concept to the development of expertise. But in a lot of fields, sport included, education, nurture seems to be the one we focus on particularly. So nature is this idea that you are born with innate gifts, and nurture is the idea that you are a product of your experiences. And in the athletic domain, this is generally a distinction between genetics on the one hand and practice and training on the other. So what is the evidence for those two pieces? I'm going to focus on nurture first, because this is the one that's had the most attention in the athletic domain. The first one you may have heard of, even if you're not interested in sport, and that is 10,000 hours, or the 10,000 hours rule of practice. Now, this is meant to be not just any old practice, but deliberate practice. And this is credited to Anders Ericsson, who's a psychologist at Florida State University. The idea here is if you complete 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, which is focused, based on trying to improve, it's often not particularly enjoyable and very individual based, you can reach expertise. And this has been championed by writers such as Matthew Said, who's a Times columnist in his book Bounce, as well as Malcolm Gladwell, who's a New York Times columnist in his book Outliers. And it is now often referred to as Gladwell's 10,000 hours rule, even though it's actually Anders Ericsson's original work. So what's the evidence in sport that 10,000 hours are necessary? Because if this is the thing, we need to promote, everybody has to just practice a lot. Well, in fact, what we find across many sports, so that's, for example, hockey, netball, football, and basketball, to achieve gold medal or world champion status, as few as 4,000 to 5,000 hours may be all that is necessary. Now, similarly, the 10,000 hours rule is an extension of what was often called the 10-year rule. And that came from work from authors called Simon and Chase, who suggested that to reach grandmaster level in chess, you might need 10 years of an apprenticeship. Well, actually, we find that to reach Olympic level, this example here is skeleton, as few as 14 months may be necessary. And Donald Thomas here was the 2007 world champion in high jump, and he achieved that within just 16 months of trying out the sport. Now, he did transfer from basketball, so presumably he took with him an entire skill set that worked in that new domain. So the practice, the 10,000 hours practice rule, doesn't appear to work as simply as stated in sport. And what about athlete support programs? Here I often urge caution to parents who are encouraged to sort of cart their children all over the country to attend specific squads and programs. Generally, it's thought that you must be in a sport development program to make it. And when I was doing the interviews back in 2011 with athletes, I had to go up to the velodrome in Manchester quite often. And they would say there, if we don't get a child in by the age of 14, we cannot turn them into a potential Olympian. Well, that may be true in their eyes, but the evidence from the research base doesn't support that. In fact, this is what we think on the left success looks like, a nice linear path from coming into a squad and being sort of chucked out at the end as an elite gold medalist, when in reality, the path to the top is incredibly non-linear. There is selection, deselection, success, failure, and it's being able to manage those different things that appears to differentiate the people who come out at the end. And there are 3 key points about squads and athlete support programs, and they are these. There is considerable annual turnover of athletes within squads. The younger the first recruitment to a support program, the younger the exit. And the higher the level attained and the higher level of senior success, the later the age of recruitment onto an athlete support program or squad. So in other words, what this really means is these programs don't work, but at the best, you should go into them later on and not be tempted to rush in early on in your development. Similarly, and sort of related to this, is the idea of specializing in one sport. It seems intuitive. You should start early, focus on one sport, and you'll become expert. And no doubt there are stories of this happening. But again, the evidence suggests it's much more beneficial for you to try out lots of different sport. It's called sampling. So sample lots of sports as a youngster and only really specialize in late adolescence, early adulthood. And even at that point, it's still really important to be practicing your main sport, but couple that with extensive practice and play in lots of other sports. So you probably get the sense what I'm saying is that what we know about nurture may not be as simple as some of the work that goes on at the moment. So what's the other side, the nature or the genetics? Because the 10,000 hours rule, for example, it almost exclusively rules out any influence of genetics. I mean, anyone, if they practice 10,000 hours, can reach the top. So this is basketball. So on the left, we have Jorge Murasan, and on the right, a Manute Bol. I really love the picture on the right because Manute Bol is actually still touching the ground, even though he's reaching up to stop this attempt at the basket. Now, these players are both 7'7" and 2 of the tallest players ever to have played in the National Basketball Association. Now, the average height of an NBA player is 6'7", and the average wingspan, which is sort of hand to hand stretched out, is between 6'8" and 7 feet. So what's the likelihood of us making it into the NBA? Well, I'm about 5'8", so I'm highly unlikely to have ever made it. But if you are between 6 feet and 6'2", you have around a 5 in a million chance of making it. If you're between 6'2" and 6'4", you have a 20 in a million chance. If you're between 6'10" and 7 feet, that goes up to a 32,000 in a million chance, around a 3% chance of making it. But then if you're above 7 foot, you have a 17% chance of getting into the NBA. So that means if you walk down the street in New York, 6, 7 feet people walk towards you, one of them is currently playing in the NBA. So that's quite a simple message about genetics there. But also we now know that there are some sort of performance genes. This is Hugh Montgomery. He's somebody I'm working with, is a geneticist at University College London. He was the first to discover a performance gene. And in this case, it's called the ACE gene, or angiotensin converting enzyme. And in this, you have some certain alleles. So you may have a profile of having insertion, I alleles, or deletion, D alleles. And if your sort of profile is you have 2 I's, you're an II, you are much more likely to be an endurance athlete. And if you have a DD, you're much more likely to be a power athlete. And he found this out by trying to look at the profiles of those who are summiting high mountains. Now, while we can't say this will lead to you being an elite athlete, this might down the line influence whether you are more likely to be good at one sport or another. The idea of single genes has kind of rather gone out the window now, and people are looking at combinations of multiple genes, and they call that polygenicity. So that's genes. So let's move to, I've done the nature and the nurture, and then I said and beyond. So this is what brings me explicitly to the Great British Medalists Project and the data we collected on this. So looking at biographies of super elite and elite athletes from Olympic sports and trying to compare them. We've done quite a bit of work on this already, and even during this lockdown, I've been writing a subsequent paper, which should come out sometime next year. So what we were trying to do was look at whether we could compare our serial medalists or our multiple gold medalists, our super elite athletes, with our merely elite athletes. So those who are funded international athletes, so funded by national lottery and exchequer funds, and trying to see if we could match them by sport, sex, discipline, and era, and see if there are any differences between them. So remember, what we were interested in was this difference between super elite athletes on the one hand and elite athletes on the other. So are there any differences? So this is our super elite athletes. For our super elite athletes, what they found was that sport was the most important thing in their life. Now, this was quite striking because sport came before everything: family, relationships. And what struck me in interviews was that a lot of these athletes, even though they had recently retired, suggested they would quite happily give up everything they now had to have one more crack at trying to win a gold medal. They wanted to be the best, meaning they wanted to beat other people, but they also wanted to be the best they could be. So they were trying to be the best version of themselves and always trying to improve. They described being ruthless and selfish, and obsessive and perfectionistic. And the example I always like to give here is when I was interviewing, I would say, so how much training did you do on May the 3rd? And this might have been 10 or 15 years ago or something. And they would disappear into the back of their house, dig out a load of diaries, bring them forward and say, okay, on that date, I did a training session on the morning, a training session in the afternoon, this amount of time, these distances, these times, and so on. So this real sort of attention to detail. Now, the coach, they suggested the coach had met their needs in terms of support. So that might be emotional support, esteem, informational support, tangible support, but also in terms of tailoring training to meet their needs and knowing when to challenge and push them, but also knowing when to hold them back, so to prevent them from burning out and getting injured. The super elites also described significant turning points, which appeared to lead to them being remotivated to go on and continue trying to achieve high levels of performance. So, for example, they might have been selected to a squad or deselected, but each time this led to a redoubling of their motivation. Now, with the elite athletes, they tended to say, so I've been to an Olympic Games, I didn't medal. Do I really want to go through another 4 years in the hope that I might get to an Olympics again and I might just make a medal? And they tended to say, do you know what? I want to go and have a normal life and I want to get out of this. Whereas for the super elite athletes, they felt they had no choice. Whether things had gone well or badly, they had no choice but to go back and try again. So the final point here is about a negative life event. Now, this is somewhat controversial at the moment, and the jury's sort of out on this, but certainly in our sample, our super elite athletes described some sort of early childhood experience which may have had some influence on whether they then were particularly motivated to achieve. So this might have been death of a parent, or parental divorce, or absent father, alcoholic parent, even learning difficulties or being sent away to school. So some of these appeared to be things that they felt really had an influence on their motivation to want to achieve at the highest level. So that's our nature, nurture, and our great British medalists. If you were to think about this person that I've just described as a super elite, you might think this isn't someone I really want to have much to do with. And this is not really surprising, because if we think there were 307 gold medals available at the Rio Games for a worldwide population of 7.4 billion, these athletes are by definition abnormal. So we shouldn't expect normal behaviours from our super elite athletes. Similarly, we're at the home of AFC Bournemouth. 1.45 million players play organised youth football at any one time. Only 180 of them are ever going to make it into the Premier League, which is a very, very small success rate of less than 0.012%. So from here, some hunches are, these are the latest findings. It's important to think that we're talking about super elites and teams. How many super elite athletes do you need in your teams? So back in 2015, in England rugby, Stuart Lancaster was the coach then, and he had a system called 6-6-5, By this, he thought to win a World Cup, I needed 6 world-class players. I needed to have 6 players that could play in every position, and we would win 5 championships or 5 sort of titles of some kind by 2020. As you all may know, England actually got dumped out of the World Cup in 2015 in the first round. But what is important is to profile your people, support them, and to understand that there is more than one way to reach the top. So then in taking this and thinking, how does this reflect on business? This work is now the primary piece of empirical research that underpins talent development in sport. This is Simon Timpson, who was at the England-Wales Cricket Board, UK Sport, the LTA, and has now just moved to Manchester City. He's somebody I'm still working with. But this is Sir Michael Barber, who was a former aide to Tony Blair, and he commented that he read the Great British Medalist Study after he heard about it from Team Sky and was struck by the similarities he saw between these characteristics and those seen in top performers in government. So he seemed to feel that there was a crossover to other domains beyond sport. So if we were to look at that, it's the same as my hunches. It's really be great if you think about you, the people you work with, your business. Do you understand who are your super elites and your elites? It's important to beware oversimplifying the message of how we reach elite level. Beware fads, because people can jump onto the 10,000 hours rule, for example, and think that's all we need to do. It's important to profile and know your people and support them. And again, understand there's more than one way to reach the top. So you may have very amenable people in your organization, but you could also have very difficult people, but they may be your world-class performer. So if you want to read any more about what I've talked about today, here's a really nice, just short journalistic piece in the conversation, about 800 words. Please feel free to go and have a look at that. And it'd be lovely to hear some of the questions you may have come up with while I've been talking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. If you can unshare your screen for me in a tick, that would be great so we can see people. Wow. I mean, there's some really, really interesting stuff in that, even if you are, if you're interested in sport specifically, then it's great. But the takeaways from that, for me, in terms of that, from a business perspective, a couple of ones really, really stand out, which is know your people. And then there is this interesting drive that, that almost cliche alert here, guys. Any team becomes a reflection of its leader. And so as leaders in our teams and in our businesses, what are we doing that's impacting on those people that look to us for leadership? The nature versus nurture debate as well. I think, interestingly, Tim, as well, the path to success is not a straight line.
No,
I think that's a really interesting one, because we tend to hear, don't we, the people who are put up as icons of business, almost of their inexorable rise to the top, as if it was just literally they got onto this escalator and it just kept going. But what you seem to be telling us is that escalator stops, breaks down, you can fall off it. Sometimes it can be the wrong escalator. Sometimes you can fall backwards. So it's a really, really, really interesting way to look at our businesses in terms of the things that we think we should be doing. And I come back to it again, this issue of knowing your people. And there's more than one ways of doing things. But again, if it's taught us anything over the past few weeks, it's been the importance of people. Yes, technology and all that kind of stuff has made us really fundamentally rethink what our businesses do and how they do it. But know your people also means know your customers, know your markets as well, and understand them. So we've got some great questions. If you've got any questions, ladies and gentlemen, please use the chat function and send them through. We'll try and rip through as many of these as we can. Tim, first one, does age have any perception or warp our perception of elite status, in the sense of we're always being told about wonder kids? You know, if you look back to, say, Tiger Woods, when he first came through, won his first major. So does age have any perception on this in terms of us thinking that super elite is all about wonder kids?
Yeah, so that's a great example, isn't it? Tiger Woods. I just only last night was watching something on Netflix about, I think it's called The Short Game, and it was trying to look at youngsters at age 7 who are attending Pinehurst to play this world championship. And of course, yeah, there is always this narrative, maybe with the Williams sisters in tennis as well, of starting very, very early. And of course, you start to think, right, to reach the top, you must be incredibly young. Now, quite obviously, if you start early, you will develop a skill set. And so somebody who's 4 starts playing golf and then competes with somebody who's 7 later on, and that person has never played golf. You might think, wow, the 4-year-old has got loads of talent. But what you might be seeing is just that person started a bit earlier and has practiced longer. The key for us is how long that lasts. The path is littered with early childhood prodigies who just do not go on to achieve later on. So even though you may get the one Tiger Woods, you've probably got every other person in the world is not going to make it from an early start. So I think what I always like to do is try to just urge caution, because I'm a parent as well. So you're thinking, what's the best thing I can do with my child? Should I push them on early to do this sport or not? And actually the evidence suggests there is more to be lost from starting early, or at least from focusing on just one sport early, than there is from sampling lots of different sports and getting experiences, which will help you, because if you play a team sport and an individual sport, you may get some crossover. You may get some physical crossover by doing basketball that will help you in your golf. So there's no, I think that's my answer. There's no point in carrying on.
Okay. We've had a comment from Mark Cooper at Allen and Thomas, who's referring back to your percentages when you were talking about the amount of people who make it in the Premier League. And Mark says, surely the percentage of youth football players in England would actually be even lower due to the high percentage of players that come in from overseas that maybe haven't gone through the youth system.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily have specific numbers on that, but I mean, the general idea is you sometimes hear people talking and they say things like, we shouldn't be focusing on the 1% that make it. But actually, in those talks, I always like to come and say, it's not even 1%. It's massively, massively less than that. So again, if you put all your eggs in one basket and push just with one sport, the odds are stacked against you. So really, that's the point to make. I mean, you won't get there without going through this system, in a sense, but the odds are stacked against you, and you have to think, how much do I really want to put in to just this one sport with the infinitesimal chance that I might make it?
Really interesting question from David McDonald at Vistage here, Tim, which is it's very, very complimentary, great thought-provoking presentation.
Thank you.
Great. So super elites make very poor leaders? ?
Yeah, so actually, well, Paul, you may recall when we talked about coming on with this call, you said you might ask me at the end who would make a great a leader from the super elite people in sport.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, my answer was going to be I probably wouldn't choose a super elite to be my leader. That said, there is even evidence outside of sports. So there was a really fascinating study done on US presidents. So 100 different people were asked to rate the performance of US presidents up to, I think, George W. Bush. And what they found is actually the one of the key leadership traits was something that's often related to a psychopathic trait, which is called fearless dominance. So even though you may have all these other things about high narcissism, this fearless dominance was seen as being a strong attribute in the world's best leaders. Whether you would want any of the world's best leaders to be your CEO, that's obviously a different kettle of fish. But yeah, I would probably say generally you don't want the super elite as your leader. You want somebody who you can see as one of us and is sort of really playing for the team, I think.
That opens up a whole conversation there about the nature of leadership and so forth. Just moving that through a little bit, Tim. Susanna Braid-Waring from Aspirin Business says, many elite performers seem to use their most painful life events to energize, focus and drive them. Do you think that ultimately limits their capability because they're coming off a kind of a negative, even though it's being turned into a positive?
Yeah, and as I said, that's sort of the finding we had in the Great British Medalist Project. I'm always slightly wary to say, therefore, that all super elite athletes will be like this, because it sounds sort of deterministic, doesn't it? You will only make it if you've had sort of early childhood trauma, to use that sort of expression.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a lot more complex than that, because I think also some of the drive is probably even genetic, even though we don't have enough evidence for that. Psychology and personality traits have a genetic underpinning.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that helps them the rest of their life, I mean, actually, some of the super elite athletes are so driven, they seem to be able to go on to do something later after their careers ended, and they're still driven to achieve. Some of them go into business, obviously into presenting. They do leadership talks. But again, if you bring in a super elite athlete to do your after dinner talk, hoping it will inspire your business, I have a lot of doubts whether that helps, because that person is just not on the same sort of. It's just on a completely different level in their thinking. So I'd always be wary of whether they can achieve. Yeah.
Just to very quickly to move on from that, we'll go on to another question. Paul Kincaid from Selfless Leadership says, is there any difference in gender here between super elite males and super elite females using negative life experiences in a different way? He's coming from his own military experience, where what he was saying is that from the military experience, super elite males had a negative life event historically, but female super elite performance didn't seem to have that same life event. Is there any sense in which gender plays a part here or not?
Okay, well, that's a fascinating finding, actually, and that's certainly not anything that we noted in our data. So we found that it was the experience was similar across gender. But I must state that this is only some of the research. There's another group that are actually not sure they're finding so many differences between super elite athletes and elite athletes as we have found. So it may be something either peculiar to the Great British sample, to athletics, that may be different from a military background.
Okay, really interesting one here from Jan at Dorset Creative. When we came onto age, and you were talking about, back to the wonder kid and starting early process, how late an age can an individual, or have you got evidence to suggest an individual can be in order to specialize in a sport, or maybe even, this is an interesting one for us in business, a leadership in business, in technical areas, but still potentially gain elite or super elite status?
Yeah, I think the issue about the specializing is that we just suggest that if you just do your one sport very, very early on, that may be an issue. But actually, it's still important to sample lots of different sports and then to maybe specialize and focus later on. So if, for example, you wanted to become a tennis world champion and you've never played tennis, and at 18 you decide, I'm going to have a go at tennis, but you're clearly terrible at this sport and you haven't learned the fundamentals, it is going to take you a long time to get that skill set. By the time you're sort of 30 and you're getting good at your sport, you're close to retirement age in tennis. So there is an issue. But a lot of our athletes, however, did transfer late. So they may have moved, say, to rowing or something when they're even in their early 20s or something. But remember, rowing, whilst it is technical, it also needs you to be very tall, have very long limbs, and a huge lung capacity. So you can definitely change to a certain sport, but I wouldn't say you would necessarily be very good at a high skill sport if you've never done any high skill sports in your early childhood.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions. So if you've got a question, get it in real quick. Tim, really interesting one from Roger Crisp, who's an independent media advisor. And this is one that I'm very interested in as well. The top football managers haven't necessarily been top players. So again, just comment really on that issue of the top super elite performance as players, but that doesn't necessarily translate into top elite performance in terms of managerial status or leadership.
Yeah, and I think that fits with everything we've said. So it's very easy. If you come out of playing football at the highest level, you think, this is how I did it, this is how it worked, this is how I'm going to do it as a manager, and it falls flat. You do need to be very open to new ideas and to really understanding what genuinely works. I mean, obviously an exception to that would be somebody like Alex Ferguson. So, if you to ask me who would be a good manager, I mean, I'm an Arsenal and Bournemouth fan. So, it pains me to say something good about Manchester United, but Alex Ferguson did appear to be able to sort of corral the troops as well as coping with his super elite difficult players and making the most of things.
A question for me really on that, just taking that forward. Does that mean that as the manager, he pulled the people he instinctively knew, or pulled the people around him who would respond to that style?
I think so. And if anyone's interested in his way of working, Harvard Business Review did actually do an article on Alex Ferguson called Ferguson's Formula. And I think he comes out with sort of 8 key attributes that he thinks could work for him and could transfer into business settings. I think that's a really interesting read. I just think what he was sometimes known in the media for was what was referred to as the hairdryer treatment. You know, the assumption that all he would do is shout and scream at his players. But I think he also knew he needed a player. For example, Eric Cantona played for Manchester United, a fiery character, but he knew how to get the best out of that player and to keep that player in the club, but also knew when it was time to move players on. I
think I'll come to a final question. It's actually from Rob Mitchell himself from AFC Bournemouth, which was based on just on that. What tools are there around to profile people in teams? I mean, I know we've got an awful lot of people on the webinar today who use team and individual profiling tools. I mean, motivational maps is one that I use and have used for quite a while. And there are a number of other of those. How much personality profiling and that kind of stuff goes on in sport, and what tools do you know?
There's less sort of formal use of questionnaires. I mean, obviously, I know of plenty that are used in business. 16PF is one. But I think one of the recognitions in sport, at least, is that personality psychology is important. We need to profile it more. So actually, it's often done in more of an interview-based process. And actually, the work we've done has informed UK sport. So they do this profiling on athletes to try to look for these behaviours. Because, of course, you could have a presentation like the one I've given, and if you're working with athletes or business, you could say, well, so what? So you've just told me the attributes about these people. And of course, what I'd be saying is, what this tells us is, yes, this may be who you've got, but you need to understand them so you know how to work with this athlete, how you need to work with this athlete, or if you're in business, how to work with this person and this person. So you don't have to profile them necessarily just using standard personality questionnaires, but an interview-based guide where you try to get at some of these things would be the way forward.
Okay. We're coming to the end. It's almost 11. It's almost 11 o'clock. I got a feeling this could go on and on and on, Tim. Couple of very quick final questions. You've hinted at one, but this is the penultimate one. From Rob Tanner at Solweb. You referred to Bob Eamon in your presentation. Who, at the moment, in your opinion, is the premier super elite sports person of all time? So who would you go at currently as we stand, suddenly in case anybody else comes out, who would you go? That's the one. That's the super elite sports person.
You know, I really should have sort of prepped for this. It's such an obvious, perfect question. If I were to take a male athlete, I would certainly, because of my earlier interest in playing tennis, I would think Roger Federer is incredible. He may not end up having the best record in tennis, but I would go with Roger Federer. And then, yeah, there you go.
This is what it's like. This is what it's like to put an academic right on the spot. Straight.
Sorry, I should have been more prepared. Thanks.
I think Roger Federer is a classic answer. Be interesting, everybody on the webinar. Who do you think is the super elite sports person of all time? But more importantly, why? What is it about them, in your opinion, that makes super elite sports person? And then the final question, Tim, which is what I said. Which current super elite sports person, and you kind of said, do you think would make a brilliant business leader? Who could make that transition over, do you think?
See, I'm going to say none.
Yeah.
Yeah, given what I know about them. I mean, there I say Roger Federer is a great super elite athlete, but I mean, highly narcissistic, you know, absolutely focused on himself always. Is that the person you want running your business? I'm not so sure. So I'm going to say none.
So effectively, the message from Professor Tim Rees from Bournemouth University today is: anything you look at in a super elite athlete, don't put them in charge of anybody.
That's not quite true.
Message.
That's not quite true. I mean, you need it. Don't forget. Sorry, just as a quick, you need a winner. So Eddie Howe, you need somebody who's going to take Bournemouth on, for example, and make sure that they win, stay in the Premiership, and keep kicking on. So you need that drive, and there's got to be something slightly peculiar about that drive as well. So let's not forget that.
I think anybody that wants to run their own business or is in leadership in business or in whatever, there has to be something slightly peculiar about them anyway, Tim, to actually want to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, we should do this, even though it'll be silent. But if you could give a huge round of applause and let Tim see that for that wonderful presentation that he just gave. Tim, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I mean, takes out of that, the path of success is not a straight line. Know your people. Have a clear vision in terms of what it is you want to do. Interestingly for me, it's never too late. It's not the fact that you didn't do something when you were 15 means you can't do it now. Also, I think the interesting bit there is the issue of balance. One of the things I found interesting, Tim, from what you were saying is that super elites, but all have their sport, but they also have a good balance, or there's a good thing to have in balance of other sports, which from a takeaway from us, if the past few weeks has taught us anything, it's the importance of work-life balance and the attitude of actually having things elsewhere within our lives that balance that off. Tim, this could go on forever, but thank you again. Thank you so much for that. Just to say, if anybody wants to get in contact with you, Tim, about any further information about all of that, that's okay, I assume, is it?
Absolutely. I always like, people contacting me.
Great. So AFC Bournemouth commercial team, I suppose if people get in contact with you for Tim's contact details or whatever, or if you could circulate them round so that you can talk to Tim, that would be great. It just remains for me to say thank you. Thank you all this morning for taking time and coming and doing this. I personally found it really both inspiring and challenging in terms of what we do from a business perspective, and also in terms of our own leadership behaviours. We have to thank the official partners for AFC Bournemouth Business. So Bournemouth Chamber of Trade and Commerce, Dorset Chamber, Dorset Search and Rescue, Global Reach, Hill Osborne, and Strategic Solutions. Just to go back to something that Rob said earlier, we're all working. We're working on what the next set of webinars should be. So if you have any ideas, things that you think would be great, people that you think would be good for us to hear, and then take some takeaways for our business, let the commercial team know. We'd love to hear from you. Also, we're going to do a business card draw. So even though we can't get a business card, those of you who came today, we've got the details, we're going to do a draw. And actually, we've got a signed football for you from the AFC Bournemouth team. So we'll let the winner know as soon as we've actually drawn that. Thank you again to Rob and the commercial team at AFC Bournemouth for business for this whole business seminar. Stay safe. Go do something different. Look at where we are with that. If nothing else, look at who we are as leaders and teams, and understand our teams and understand our customers. And maybe in these strange days, go and do something for our business that's innovative and different that we never thought we could, but actually is probably going to pay us off and make us those super elite businesses. So, ladies and gentlemen, have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you very soon. Thanks ever so much. Goodbye.